Hi everyone, in this video I'll be doing a tutorial on how I process my astro images. So right here I have a picture I took a few days ago of the flaming star and the Tadpole Nebula in the constellation Auriga. Total about 5 hours of 120-second subs. So this right here is straight out of Deep Sky Stacker. So it's 32 bits per channel right now. So the first thing we want to do is to convert this to 16 bits per channel. We want to use exposure and gamma as our method. And then we can go ahead and we can duplicate this layer. Let's call this first stretch. The reason I'm duplicating layers often throughout my processing is I like to have a non-destructive workflow. So if I ever need to go back to someplace, it's right there in the layers. If you want to reduce your file size after you're done, you can always delete layers, but when you're processing, it's handy to have them there. So the first thing I want to do is to align these color channels and to do, well, let's first actually do a gentle stretch. Just pull that in a little bit, and now let's align these color channels. So basically we are looking at the histogram right here, and we want all of these channels to overlap. That way we can get rid of this cyan color cast we have right now. So first let's go to our red channel, let's push that out a little bit, and now let's pull all the green and the blue channel back. So we can maybe make that a bit wider. And we're looking at the histogram and that looks about right. Now for the blue channel. And I'd say that's about good. As you can see, we fixed the color cast and we can already start to see some of the red nebulosity coming through. So next up, we want to do another gentle stretch here. Or not with the curves, we want to use levels actually for now. So that's about good. And maybe we want to do a gentle S-curve. What we want to do is we want to create a bit of contrast between these stars, especially the faint stars in the background, because what we're going to do right now is we're going to run a program called StarNet, which will go through and remove all of these stars so we can edit the nebulosity directly. But first, I want to crop this image. As you can see in the corners, we have some weird looking stars, and that's caused by the optical aberrations of my lens and the fact that my field isn't perfectly flat, but we can fix that easily just by getting rid of it. So let's just do a quick crop, like so. Maybe we can make it a bit bigger. Want to center it on our nebula. I'd say that looks about right. There we go. And now actually, I might do a quick color balance adjustment because it looks like the background is a very tad bit green. So let's do that real quick with a color balance layer. Yep, that seemed to have made a pretty big difference. Okay, so now we're going to run StarNet on this image. We'll be back in a few seconds. Okay, so now that StarNet has finished running, we can do some processing on just the nebulosity without worrying about the stars. So the first thing we want to do is we're going to duplicate this layer. And we're going to do a gentle stretch. That looks about good. Now we're going to make some curves layers, and we're going to use a really powerful tool called arc sign stretching. This will really help us bring out the faint nebulosity without blowing out the brighter areas. So after you do a arcsine stretch, you'll notice that we do have a lot more detail showing through, especially the fainter detail, but we also blown out the white, we've blown out the black point, so our background is some weird off-white color. But we can easily fix that by resetting our black point to something like that. And as you can see, that looks much better. But now we have something new. We have a bit of a gradient showing through, so let's get rid of that using our very handy gradient exterminator tool. So let's first lasso out the nebulosity, and we'll do filter, gradient exterminator, and we'll see how that does. That's great. So now that we have a flatter background, we can play around with some luminosity layers. But before we do that, let's reset our black point a bit further to the right now that we've used gradient exterminator. And look at that, we've already made a huge difference. So now let's look at our different color channels. Of course, since this is a hydrogen emission nebula, we have a lot more detail in the red channel. So let's take advantage of that. We'll copy our red channel and paste it over our image. And we'll set blending to luminosity. But before we do that, let's do a bit more editing on just this red channel for now. So first, let's set the black point on this channel a bit further. Just took a drink of water there. And now let's do some S-curves to bring out the contrast on this image a bit more. So as you can see, that's the before and after, so we just punched out the brighter areas a bit. And actually we can we can set the black point, I think, a little further, just so we don't blow out the background too much. And now we can set this blending to luminosity, and look at that. Look at what a big difference that made in bringing out especially the very faint and very fine detail. So now, as you can see, we did bring out a lot of detail, but a lot of the colors also got washed out. So that's sort of the drawback with luminosity layers. So usually you want to turn down the opacity a little bit. Let's try 80 for now. And we want to punch up the saturation. Now, one thing you might notice is if we just increase the saturation to something where it looks pretty good, we also get a lot of this weird background noise. So we want to just increase the saturation of the nebulosity. And we can do that by using selective masking. So let's first get rid of this layer first. Let's stamp visible to create a new layer. And we go to select color range. And we want to select this to sampled colors. And now we just take samples of all of the red nebula. That might have been a bit too much. Okay, maybe something like that. And then we go to select a mask to preview our mask. And maybe we'll feather this slightly. And we'll shift the edge a little bit. And I think that looks pretty good. Then we can go to layer, new adjustment layer, and then hue saturation. So we can alt click on this layer, and that'll bring us to the mask. Now we can see that we did also select a lot of the background noise. So we want to just paint that out with a large soft brush. We can put that on black, and we can just paint out anything that's not the nebula. I'm trying to be careful to avoid painting over a lot of the fine outer wisps of hydrogen. So that looks about good. So let's go back to this and let's, as you can see, when we adjust our saturation now, we're not affecting the background as much. So let's just bump that up slightly, and let's leave it at that. Now at this point, I might want to recover a bit more detail out of this nebula, so we can do another set of arcsine stretches, but this time a lot more gently. So this time we're using arcsine 10, last time we used arcsine 100. And again, after we do an arcsine stretch, we want to reset the black point. And now we've brought out a lot of noise because that stretch was way too much. So we can get around this by reducing the opacity of the stretch layers, the curves layers. Maybe something like 25%. Let's see how that works. Alright, not bad. Now, we have a lot of this color noise in our background, so the next thing we want to do is we want to desaturate the background layer, and that will help get rid of a lot of this noise. So similar to how we did a mask for this hue saturation layer, we can do another mask to mask out the nebula, and so we just have the background, and then we can desaturate it. So again, we go to color range. This time actually let's try highlights, and we want to adjust this so something like that. Again, we can preview our mask. We can do a feather. So now we go to layer, new adjustment layer, hue saturation. Alt click on that to view the mask, and then Control I to invert it. Then we want to increase the contrast by a bunch. Then we can use our paintbrush. Let's make this smaller actually. And we want to paint out, again, everything that's not the nebula. Something like that. Then we can go to our layer, and then we can slide our saturation down a bunch, and that got rid of a lot of the color noise that we were seeing from before, as you can see. And it didn't really affect the nebula at all, because again, we masked it out. So now, using the same masking technique, we can do some masks. We can do some curve stretches on just the nebula. So select color range. Okay. We can. So this time we're going to do a curves layer. So once again, let's clean up some of this background selection that we got. That looks about good. So now we can do a gentle curve stretch. So a word of warning for doing masking and curves is if you push up the curves too much, you're going to get this really unnatural look. It looks very artificial because it just looks weird. So what you want to do is you want to be subtle about this, not too much, and you really want to bring the shadows close to the original. So we're basically just boosting the brighter areas of the nebula a bit more, as you can see. Now at this point, I'm pretty happy with how this is turning out. One thing that we can do now is we can try to get rid of some of this noise. So I'm going to take this image into Topaz Labs and see what we can do there. I like to use low light. And let's see what auto does for us first. It's not too bad. Definitely want to turn down the enhanced sharpen a bit and turn up the remove noise by quite a bit actually, because we are still seeing a lot of noise. Okay, so now let's see if we can recover some of that original detail. Let's see what our original looks like. So as you can see, we got rid of a ton of noise, but we're still retaining a lot of the detail, and that just shows you the power of Topaz. It's really incredible. So let's apply that. And this is going to take a second. Alright, now that Topaz has finished, again we can see the before and after difference that Topaz made. It's quite huge. Let's have a look at our channels again. And a lot of this processing, it's very subjective. What I'm showing you right now, it's not a set in stone step-by-step process that you want to do with every single image. It's more of a collection of little different tips and techniques that you can use in different combinations when you're processing different images. So right now I'm feeling like maybe we can do another luminosity layer. So again, we go to channels, we click on our red channel, and we copy out the red channel, and we paste it on top. And once again, with our luminosity layer, let's adjust the black point a bit further. Something like that. And we can pump up the contrast ever so slightly. Let's set blending to luminosity and look at the difference that made. Now that also brought out a ton of this pattern noise that we got from Topaz, but we can control that by adjusting the opacity of this layer. Something like 40% perhaps. And as always, after we finish a luminosity layer, we want to bring up the saturation. Something like that looks about good. Now let's see if we can do something about this graininess that Topaz has introduced. It's a lot better than the noise we were having before, but we still want to try to control it. So let's let's stamp visible, make a new layer. Then we go to filter, noise, despeckle. And yep, that did seem to help. Okay, at this point we are pretty close to being able to add our stars back in. I'm just thinking if there's anything else we might want to do here. I think we could do a couple more rounds of noise reduction. Yeah. So what I'm going to use right now is something called astronomy tools. It's a set of action sets for Photoshop. I think it cost around $25. But remember, these are action sets, so you can do all of this manually without the astronomy tools. But it'll just take a lot longer. So right now we're going to do something called deep space noise reduction. I apologize there. So what deep space noise reduction does is it masks out the nebula, and it only does noise reduction on the background. So if you didn't have astronomy tools, you would do something similar with the select and mask highlights, and then only apply your noise reduction to the background after masking out the nebula. But with deep space noise reduction, it's just the click of a button. And it'll take some time and it'll do its thing. You can see it creating its mask. And there it is. You can see that it did make quite a big difference if we look at the before and after. A bit too much of a noise reduction, I'm thinking right now. So actually, let's turn down the opacity of this layer to 60%. I think that's looking a lot better. Okay, so what I'm thinking is we might be able to get away with another curve stretch, possibly. Let's see what this looks like. So again, we'll do select highlights. We'll preview our mask. We'll add a bit of feathering. Layer, new adjustment layer, curves. Just a little bit this time, not too much. Don't want to go overboard. I think that looks okay. Alright, cool. So now we're ready to play around a bit in a camera raw filter and see what we can do using the tools there. The first thing I want to do is do some noise reduction. So let's do a bit of color noise reduction, not too much, since we already got rid of a lot of the colors, the color noise when we did our desaturation of the background. Now let's try a noise reduction and see what we can do here. Maybe sharpen it a tad. And I think that's pretty good. Of course, with noise reduction, you're going to be sacrificing a little bit of detail, but I think it's worth it. And let's try to bring out the reds a bit more with the color mixer. Alright, so let's stand visible and we'll do something else with camera raw filter. And there's a reason we made a new layer for that. I'll show you that in a second. So something else that you can do to get a really nice soft transition from the nebula to the background is you can play around with the texture slider here. So as you can see, if you slide the texture slider to the right, it really sort of smears the nebula into the background. But we don't want it that much. We want just a little bit. I think that looks good. But as you can see, when we decrease the texture, we also lose a bit of detail, some contrast. But we'll get that back in a second. So because we did this on a new layer, we can apply a mask to that layer. And then, if we want the background to show through, all we have to do is paint on that mask using black. So for these very bright areas where we didn't really need to get rid of the texture there, we can just paint over that with black, and as you can see, we are recovering our detail back from the previous layer. So you just want to use a paintbrush, a small soft paintbrush, and you want to go over all these highly detailed areas and get the texture back. Let's go up to the spider nebula right here, and the fly nebula. And I think that looks pretty good. So one last thing in camera raw filter. We can do some fiddling around with clarity and dehaze. So if we bring up clarity, we can see that it really does something special with the picture. It makes it punchier, and so maybe just a little bit of that. And we might reduce the texture just slightly. And if we play around with dehaze, you can get some really interesting artistic effects. I might slide that down just a tiny bit. Maybe not that much. That looks okay. And that's about all the processing I think I'll do on the starless layer. So right now we're ready to add in our stars. So we can do that here, but I like to create a new file just so we have a clean slate to work from. So we paste first our starless image here, then we can copy our stars image, and we paste that on top. So first I'll do some work on the starless image. I'll start by getting rid of some of these artifacts that we have from StarNet. Now, a lot of astrophotography purists, they'll say, oh, this isn't, you're not preserving the integrity of your data, but you know, I don't work for NASA. I'm just here to take pretty pictures. So in my book, this is alright, because these artifacts weren't there in the first place anyway. I'm rushing through this a bit for the sake of this video, but if you're doing this on your own, you would probably go a bit slower, do this a bit more thoroughly, make sure you get everything, make sure it looks clean. But just for this video, I think what we have right now is fine. We got rid of most of the larger artifacts in the middle. So now let's take a look at our stars layer. You'll notice the background is quite gray, so I'm going to start by setting this black point quite a bit far in. And now this is personal preference. Some people like their stars smaller, but I like my stars a bit larger, so I will do a gentle curve stretch just to you can see that brings out the stars a bit more. So click OK. And we'll do a final setting of the black point to something like that. Basically, we want our stars layer to be to have a true black as the background, because we'll be adding in the background when we set our blend mode to screen. And there we go. There's our image with the stars added in. Now we stamp visible, and just for fun, I'm going to look at these channels. Wow, look at that red channel. And just for fun, we're going to do another luminosity layer just to see what it looks like. We'll turn down the opacity by quite a bit. And yeah, that did boost our nebula by quite a lot, and it didn't make the noise that much worse. So I think we'll keep it. And as always, after a luminosity layer, we want to increase saturation. Maybe that's a bit too much. How about, let's go for 30. And finally, we can do one final camera raw filter adjustment. So I want to first get rid of a lot of this color noise here. We can do that with the color noise slider. Maybe just a tad of noise reduction. Not too much, a bit of sharpening. Let's have a look at our hue slider. We make that a bit more red. We can adjust our vibrance up and also give the saturation a little kick. Maybe not as aggressive. Something like that. And finally, do we want to maybe just give clarity a little punch too? And I think that's good. So that right there is our final image. As you can see, we did the bulk of our noise reduction on the starless image over here. You don't really want to do too much noise reduction on the final image with the stars or even on the stars layer, because you're going to end up messing up your stars, and I'll show you what I mean right here. So if we go into camera raw filter again, and this is just for a demonstration, but if we go to noise reduction and we really jack up the noise reduction, we see it really messes up our stars here. We get these weird triangle shaped stars, and it's really not a good look. So if you're going to use noise reduction aggressively at all, like we had to do in this image a bit, you really want to do that on the starless layer. That will really help keep your stars sharp and round. So cancel. So that's our final image right here. So I hope you found this video helpful, and I wish you good luck in your own astrophotography editing. Thank you all for watching.